What's going on, guys? It's Cal here for Buffalo SportsCenter. And today I am joined by the founder of the YouTube channel, Don. Now, in the last video, Don was a little pessimistic about the Sabres. So today we're going to try to flip that upside down and be optimistic. Let's get right into it. So, Don, what is the first thing we're going to be talking about today about the Sabres?
Well, I want to discuss a little bit about what Kevin Adams and company did to add to what was probably a very thin and weak roster last season. So they went out in free agency. They picked up winger Jason Zucker from the Nashville Predators. He spent parts of last season with the Predators and the then Arizona Coyotes, RIP Arizona. And he also traded for third-line center Ryan McLeod in a shocking trade that sent Matt Savoy back to Edmonton. Very peculiar. I'm sure we'll get into the details of that trade because we didn't make a specific video about that. And then Sam Lafferty was picked up from the Vancouver Canucks, also in free agency on a 2-year deal. And also Nicholas Aube-Kubel was picked up. Beck Malenstein, trade day draft, or a draft day trade. We sent a second-round pick to the Washington Capitals for the services of a guy who's only scored 6 goals in his best NHL season. Love that. And most importantly, Cal, the Sabres fired, as we all know, they fired Don Granato and replaced him with Lindy Ruff, and they've also promoted Seth Appert to the NHL coaching staff. So those are some of the major off-season Sabres additions to this point at the time of this recording. And yes, you're right. I was pessimistic in the last video. I was very pessimistic because I wasn't confident that Kevin Adams would do anything. There were no indications that he'd do something. And Cal, don't you get the feeling that as the Martin Necas rumors or the Nikolai Ehlers rumors were going around, that the Sabres were probably being used by players' agents as kind of a bargaining chip for other teams?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, again, you mentioned Lindy Ruff coming to this team, and he really wanted to build that bottom six, right? We send a lot of these guys like Jurgensen, Zach Poso, they leave. Guys like you bring in those guys, those super fast players that we bring in, and you bring a toughness and a speed element to the bottom six. And then we look at the Sabres, and I mean, again, last season was horrible for the Buffalo Sabres, just an absolute train wreck for the Sabres. So the Sabres want to bring in a top six guy to get rid of a guy like Jeff Skinner. So these agents know Kevin Adams is doing everything in his power to try to get a top six forward. Now, has that happened? At the time of this recording, it hasn't. And I feel like, you got to go out and you got to get someone. You mentioned Ehlers, Necas, all of them. Also, Trevor Zegras, another guy who's been thrown in the mix. Now, all of a sudden, Jacob Trouba seems to be the next guy. So overall, yes, I do think teams are using the Sabres a little bit because they know Kevin Adams is desperate. But also, I don't think he's that desperate. And I think he would be okay not making a move for a top six forward.
Sounds like your dog, right when you mentioned and uttered the presence of Kevin Adams, started going nuts there. Oh, that's what Kevin Adams does to you. He doesn't do anything, but he certainly elicits a lot of emotion out of us Sabres fans. But I want to, again, talk about how I think we're both very disappointed about the Sabres not adding such high-impact players to this roster. And there has been a lot of debate this offseason from Sabres fans and on Twitter, well, X. There's been a lot of discourse about how the Sabres haven't brought in and replaced the goals that are going out the door. So we talk about some of these major Sabres losses, and you're thinking of guys like Jeff Skinner, as we've already mentioned. He was bought out. He's now going to Edmonton on a 1-year, $3 million deal. I wish we'd be able to do that. Oh, man. Victor Olofsson has also gone out the door. Zemgus Girgensons, again, another player we've mentioned already. He has also left the Buffalo Sabres for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Olofsson is going to Vegas. So that's a lot of goals. And I actually did some high-tech mathing skills, okay, Cal? So if you go down the list of all the players that the Sabres started off last season with, but either those players were traded mid-season or they've left this offseason. You're thinking of guys like, again, Skinner, Girgensons, Eric Johnson, Casey Middlestad, Victor Olofsson, Kyle Poso, Eric Robinson, Matt Savoy, Tyson Jost, and Brandon Byro. I totaled up all the number of goals that they scored as a collective bunch. That number was 75 goals. Now you look at the players that the Sabres have brought in this offseason, and you look at their goal totals from last year. So you're thinking of Nicolas Aube-Kubel. He had 6 goals. Dennis Gilbert. He had 1 goal against the Buffalo Sabres, and it was a game-winning
Yep, of
goal.
course.
Yep. Ryan McLeod, he had 12 goals. Jason Zucker, 14 goals. Beck Malenstein, also 6. Sam Lafferty, 13. And then, well, James Reimer's a goalie, so of course he had 0 goals. So you totaled their number of goal totals, and that only comes out to 52 total goals scored. So, what's your reaction to hearing those stats?
Yeah, I mean, on paper, it really doesn't look good at all. You're really banking on UPL having another big year in net. Maybe Devin Levi comes up to the NHL either the beginning of the year or in the middle of the year and provides that, solid backup role. James Reimer might see some NHL games this year. You're really trying to win games this year based on speed and toughness. It's not going to be goal scoring, unfortunately. And you knew that instantly when they bought out Skinner and proceeded not to replace him with a top six forward. You're not going to try to be, the fun Sabres that we saw 2 seasons ago, where every game 7-6 or 5-4, and it's just back and forth action. The Sabres are going to try to win games low scoring, and it's disappointing, but it's also very doable with the group of guys they have. Also, you look at their team last season, a lot of their top guys had regression years. We've talked about this over and over and over again. Cousins, Thompson. I mean, you go down the list of every single player that, went crazy the year before, they had down years. It was expected, right? We don't expect Tage Thompson to be scoring 5 goals a game every game. It's not going to happen. But, you look at the flip side of it, and guys like Dylan Cousins, they got to be producing more than they do right now. You also look at injuries. Tage Thompson played almost the entire season with a wrist injury. Guys like Zemgus Girgensons have been banged up for a couple of years. I know he's gone now, but he really wasn't able to produce last year. JJ Paterka, he had an up year, about the only guy who had a forward progression year. Jack Quinn, a guy who got injured twice in the season, 2 major injuries, and was unable to really contribute. When he was in there, he looked fine, but it is what it is. And I feel like we got to talk about Peyton Krebs too, because you mentioned Ryan McLeod getting traded to the Sabres as the third line center. What happens to Peyton Krebs, right? He's just not in the lineup right now. There's no spot for him. That also gives me some hope that maybe Kevin Adams can use him as trade bait and try to, combine a couple prospects and NHL ready Peyton Krebs to get that top six forward to replace Skinner. Because right now you look at the depth chart, that's a whole lot of blah. There's no superstar on the team. If you want to count Tage Thompson, you can. But again, I don't even know if you can after last season. He didn't look like the same version. I know he was injured, but still, we're not going to call a guy a superstar after one good season. You just can't do it. So we'll see what Kevin Adams, has in store. There's still a long offseason to go. But as of right now, the biggest thing, getting me excited to watch Sabres hockey next year is Lindy Ruff, and that's just not good enough.
No, not really. And it's tough, isn't it? I mean, as Sabres fans, we expected Kevin Adams to do more. And we mentioned before how I was very pessimistic in my last video when the Sabres, during my draft recap video. And I got a lot of comments, and rightly so, that said that, Don, it takes 2 to tango. You need 2 teams in order to accomplish a trade. And we have to go back to this question. 1, are players purposely blocking moves to Buffalo? And 2, do other GMs sense how desperate Kevin Adams was going into this offseason, and they felt that they could take advantage of us? Now, whether it be reason 1 or reason 2, I kind of do. They're both plausible explanations as to why Kevin Adams has been unable to do more. And then you look at the free agency market and how absolutely crazy it got this year in particular. I mean, the amount of term being handed out to third, fourth line players is absurd, Cal. It's absurd.
It is. And before I say anything, I just want to make this clear. I'm still in favor of Kevin Adams. I think his draft, skills have just been off the charts. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
ever since he got here, all of the prospects he's got, he's hit on, dead nuts. I don't know how much that's Kevin Adams, how much that's the scouting department, but his team has done a great job. Now let's get into it, because I think both scenarios you said are true. I think number one, teams do not respect Kevin Adams. He's had a couple of good trades, right? He got Devin Levi. He ended up, trading off Ristolainen in a pretty good deal. And the list goes on and on with some smaller trades that Kevin Adams has done. But again, he's failed to get that big fish. And every time the Sabres, have an offseason where, maybe, you look at last offseason where we end up getting Comrie and the Eric Johnson signing. I mean, we're like, what is going on? We get no one last year. And then this year, you get a ton of bottom six guys. So at least he did more than last year. And, he catered to Lindy Ruff's needs, but he wasn't able to get the big fish. You bring up the observation that a lot of players probably have the Sabres on their no trade list, or a lot of these players nowadays have no move clauses in their contract, and they only pick maybe like one or two teams that are Stanley Cup favorites that they'll go to. Again, it's going to be tough. I don't care if the Sabres, have the next coming of Connor McDavid and the next coming of Jack Eichel playing together. Until you make the playoffs, nobody's going to want to come here. The city's great and all that, but again, Buffalo's known as a snow wasteland, and it will forever be known as that until you make the playoffs and people start investigating a little more, seeing what Buffalo has to offer. If I'm a player in the NHL, the last thing I want to do is go to a franchise that hasn't made the playoffs in the last 13 years. So it makes sense. But also, you have an inexperienced GM, and whatever pitch he's giving to these agents and these players, it's not working. Again, he continues to get bottom feeders in free agency. He overpays for them. Again, it doesn't matter if you overpay. You look at Jason Zucker, 1 year, $5 million. That's a big need. You needed a guy like that. I don't care how much you pay him. It's a 1 year deal. And guess what? They're not going to spend anywhere near the cap ceiling. So money does not matter on a 1 year deal. You look at Ryan McLeod. That was a great trade. Again, Savoy, it sucks seeing him on the other end, but something tells me they really weren't as high on Savoy as they put out, because again, he played one game last year, played 4 minutes, pretty much sat on the bench. I mean, you could tell something was off there, right? And they never really gave him a chance. I think they were kind of bolstering him up a little bit, trying to make his value a little higher in the outside air. But internally, I don't think they liked him. So he was the first to go. And, that pretty much proved it. He was the first to go out of the prospects that Kevin Adams has hoarded for the last 2 seasons. Again, you got a lot of nothingness on this lineup right now, and maybe it'll gel together and work, but you got too many prospects again in Rochester this year to not be able to trade for a top six forward. And I get the no move clauses and I get all that. Until you make the playoffs, it's going to be tough, but you got to continue to build the culture, and that culture has been destroyed for the last 15 years.
Now, we talked about these two reasons. Are these two reasons now a good reason why Kevin Adams should overpay? Because I feel like the collective opinion around the NHL is that he overpaid for Ryan McLeod and Beckham Allenstein in these two offseason trades.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Beck trade, and I mean, other teams were trading second rounders for, established players. And then we get this guy, and it's like, geez, like, what are we doing? Again, I'm not a huge fan of the NHL draft. I think a lot of the guys you draft past the first round are just nothing. I'd rather trade, I'm in favor of trading picks for NHL ready guys. But again, there's no reason to not overpay when you have a glaring need. And, a guy like Ryan McLeod, even if you have to overpay for it, it's better than getting nothing, right? And the faith I have in Kevin Adams to go get that big fish is zero. Again, we saw it, wasn't able to do it this year as of yet. So, we'll wait and see on that one.
Absolutely. Now, with the players that the Sabres already had, you talked about how last season was a down year for almost everyone outside of Luukkonen and Peterka. Let's talk about exactly how much the Sabres lost in terms of goals scored. You brought up Tage Thompson, who was suffering through injury. We talked about Dylan Cousins as well. But what about Alex Tuch? Alex Tuch scored 14 less goals. Jack Quinn only played in 27 games last season. He scored 5 less. Cousins scored 13 less. Tage Thompson scored 18 less goals than the season before. Do you think that we are at all factoring in bounce backs for all 4 of these players?
I mean, you got to hope for a little bit of a bounce back, but you can't expect the numbers they put up 2 seasons ago. And keep in mind, right, the goaltending got way better this last year, and the goal scoring went way down. If you could have combined the goaltending from last year and the goal scoring from 2 seasons ago, this team might have won the Stanley Cup. I mean, I'm not even joking about that. I mean, you had, one of the top offenses in the league 2 years ago, and, some very solid goaltending from Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen last year. You combine those two, which, again, you still have the same players, so it's very possible to combine those two this year. It's very possible this team makes the playoffs. But to bank on that, to be a GM and bank on your players who heavily regressed last year, to just, it's fine, they're going to be healthy and they're going to be good. You got to add something. And to get rid of a guy like Skinner, I know his defense was atrocious. It is what it is. But that's a locker room guy right there. I mean, you saw Tage Thompson the day Jeff Skinner left. Tage Thompson puts on a story, best teammate ever, a little thing like that. You saw those, water videos that they put out, 2 seasons ago, those joke videos. Something tells me, they stopped kind of doing those at the end of last year. Maybe something turned internally. Maybe Skinner said, you know what? I've had enough of seeing my name at the top of that list of most NHL games played without a playoff game. So maybe he got sick of it and was like, all right, I got to get out of here. But judging by the fact that he was unwilling to move his no trade list and no trade clause, it doesn't look like he really wanted out
No.
without being cut.
Yeah.
And it is what it is, but it's a really tough position to be in. And man, I'm really hoping the best for Kevin Adams here, because in a playoff or bust year where his job's on the line, he really hasn't made this team any scarier. I think he's made them a more complete team, but at the same time, you look at teams like Nashville, who went from fringe playoff teams to this team could win the Stanley Cup just like that. And then you look at the Sabres, who continue to be in an Atlantic division where every other team improves, and they kind of sit still and hope that their own talent outworks other teams, and it just hasn't worked.
I'm going to push back a little bit on the one claim where you said that every other team in the Atlantic Division has gotten better. I wouldn't say Montreal has gotten better. They had a fairly quiet offseason. Ottawa just got rid of Jacob Chikrin. Now, they did get a real number one goalie with Linus Ullmark, but us Sabres fans and Boston fans know how he is in the clutch. Linus Ullmark is not a great goalie when down the stretch or in the playoffs. So I wouldn't say Ottawa got a whole lot better. They maintained the status quo there. Detroit, they brought back Patrick Kane and they brought in Vladimir Tarasenko.
Banking on oldies, but at least you're
Yeah,
making moves, right?
right. But if we're just making moves to make moves, how's that really making anyone any better? Detroit has done the exact opposite of what Buffalo has done. Really, Detroit and Ottawa. Detroit and Ottawa have both bought in. They went after big, pricey free agents that are proven NHL talents. And now they're both older teams. They don't have a prospect system and no future, and they both haven't made the playoffs. So, Cal, where's that balance then? Where's the balance between what the Sabres have done and relying solely on the youngsters versus teams like Detroit, Ottawa? How you can even put Washington into that conversation now, where they're fringe, right? All four of these teams are fringe playoff contenders, but three of these teams versus the Sabres have done radically different approaches to get there. What is better, and how can the Sabres get to that sort of balance in between?
Yeah, I mean, you look at teams like that, like Detroit adding Patrick Kane and Tarasenko. The Sabres have been that team before, right? We've seen them go out and get guys like Evander Kane, Ryan O'Reilly. You go back even further. I mean, the Sabres have been willing to do that in the past, but the last 5 or so years, they haven't done much. And, a team that's literally has been one piece away for 3 straight seasons now to get rid of a goal scorer in Skinner and not do anything is kind of frightening. Again, if I'm Kevin Adams, my job is on the line. You would think he would at least go out there and way overpay for one of these guys just to bring someone in to give himself a chance. Um, you look at Washington. I think Washington had a great offseason. I think, they were on the down spiral. Ovechkin's getting older. He might be out. People were talking 2 seasons ago, the Penguins and, the Capitals are going to be bottom feeders the next 10 years, once Crosby and Ovechkin are gone. All of a sudden, Washington looks like they might be a playoff team again next year and the year after and the year after. So I think you got to make moves. Again, you look at Florida though, and Florida has a lot of homegrown talent, but they also have a lot of rentals there as well. And they've just been one of the best teams in the league the last little bit. But if I'm Kevin Adams, I'm making a move like Detroit did. I'm making a move like some of these other teams have done. Even if it's a little radical, you got to make a move, right? Because if you don't make a move, that just gives you all the more reason to get fired in the offseason. We saw it last year where they did absolutely nothing at the trade or at the free agency, again with Eric Johnson and Connor Clifton, who Connor Clifton's all right, but that's your biggest move. That is your biggest move, Connor Clifton. And then this year, again, not a lot of name value. I really like what he did to the bottom six, but we're still that one move away from getting anyone excited or even remotely close to a playoff spot. So again, still a long off season to go. Trades can happen until the trade deadline now, right? So I think people are a little bit premature in their freaking out. But again, if this is the current, this current roster is what we go into game one in Prague, I mean, geez, this team may not be a playoff team again for 14 straight years. They're really banking on Lindy Ruff changing the culture here, and they're really banking on guys like Tage Thompson to just, have monster years. And again, you just can't expect that from every single player on your team. The only way this team makes the playoffs is if all of their players, at least all of their goal scorers have monster years, right? That's the only way we could see this team making the playoffs. And you just can't expect that, right? You got to bring in somebody who's proven that's a top 6 guy. And so far, again, if you count Jason Zucker being a second line winger, okay, but he's just not, right? He can fill that role, but if that's your big guy, it's just not good enough, in my opinion.
I feel like a lot of the season is actually going to hinge on whether or not Zach Benson can blossom into a top 6 role. In my depth chart that I created, now that Cap Friendly is dead, also RIP Cap Friendly,
Right.
RIP. I have as my first line Peterka, Thompson, Tuck. Then I have Benson, Cousins, Quinn on the second line. And then I like a lot what they've done with the bottom 6. You have Zucker, McLeod, Greenway. That's a nasty third line. I like that.
Yeah.
And then your fourth line is even better. Lafferty, Krebs / Beck Malenstein / Lafferty, and then Abe Kuba on the right wing. That's also a really nice fourth line. So I think your bottom 2 lines are really good. I think your second line, if Cousins plays a full season with Quinn, and maybe they even bump Peterka down to the second line. I don't think so. But if you see Benson, good. Cousins, Quinn, that's another speed line. And then Peterka, Thompson, Tuck, that line did awesome. That was the only offense for the Sabres over the last 20-something games. That was it. That line was clicking so well. And then I feel like an issue that we haven't really talked about in this video, or many people this offseason, the Sabres didn't do a whole lot to get a big-time partner for Owen Power on the defensive end. I have one question mark remaining on my depth chart right now, and it's that second top 4 guy. I have Dahlin and Bo Byram as your top pairing, and then I have Owen Power and then a blank. Do you really have an option right now in-house that you can, for who you can put Owen Power with? I mean, options are Matthias Samuelsson, Henry Jokiharju, Connor Clifton, Ryan Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, you look at that list, and the clear and obvious answer is Samuelsson. He had a really bad year last year, battled some injuries, but he's supposed to be that guy, right? I mean, they locked him up 7 years. What did he play, 20-something games? Mm-hmm. But when they did that, I mean, kind of crazy, but that's the obvious answer. Power has played very well with Jokiharju, which is interesting, and the fact they brought Jokiharju back makes me think that might be the plan. Having Samuelsson as your third-line defender, I mean, that's pretty real. That's pretty good in the NHL to have a guy like Matthias Samuelsson, at his best as a third defender. I mean, that's great. And then you bring back guys like Jacob Bryson and all that, who can fill out the rest of it. But I mean, I gotta say, the Sabres were a much better team with Jacob Bryson in the lineup last year than they were without him. So take that for what it's worth. But yeah, the Sabres defense, it's going to be much of the same. But again, you list out those forwards, and again, it's the complete opposite, but it's the same offseason for the Sabres, right? We're going to have a ton of new faces this year. But again, is there anyone that's really going to be notable? And that's yet to be determined. Again, they can mesh very well, and this could be a perfect, mismatch of guys, and Kevin Adams could be GM of the year, or they could all just kind of have the same seasons they had last year. Like you said, 6 goals, 1 goal, 5 goals, and the team could miss the playoffs again. So Kevin Adams is really riding on his guys to, bounce back from regression years and some of these new faces to mesh well. And it very well could happen. I like what I see, but again, it's not going to compete with teams with, 4 superstars in their top 6.
I know this video, folks, was supposed to be about the case for success for the Sabres, and we were so badly. We were on before talking about how we could be so optimistic, but I'm sorry, but the pessimism is seeping through. It's bleeding through your screens into your souls, and now it's gonna hopefully not influence your opinions. If you're optimistic about the Sabres going into this season, I can see a couple reasons why. Just to close this video out. The bottom 6, you have a forward group now that has an identity, Cal. We've said speed 4 or 5 times already in this video. That is the identity to this team now. And it's not all that surprising. Lindy Ruff loves fast teams that can forecheck, hit hard, defend the front of the net with some nastiness. But it all comes down to you have to have a cemented number one goalie. Sabres have that. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, who, by the way, is yet to sign a new deal. He's going to arbitration as things stand. Oh, boy. That could get
Yeah,
interesting.
that might be rough for the Sabres because he put up some nice stats last year. So I really
Yeah.
didn't want that to happen.
Yeah, that could get interesting. But again, okay, so reasons for success. The Sabres forward core. Cal, when was the last time the Sabres forward core had a collective identity? It's been a long time. Probably going back to
Yeah.
the last time Lindy Ruff coached this team.
Yeah, right? I mean, you look back at the last like 5, 6 seasons, and it's always been that one line that's their scoring line. The other things just buy time for that scoring line to get on.
Yeah.
And I hate to say it, but 3, 4 years ago when you had the log line, Gergensen, Poso, and Larson, that was your big line that produced, and then the rest of it was just, all right, we have really bad defense and some guys that can shoot, and we're down by a couple, and then okay, we could calm down. The power lines out there. I mean, it's just this team has yet to have a 4-line identity. I mean, again, since probably the last time they made the playoffs, well, not even that, probably since like 06, 07, 07, 08. So it's just been a mess. Kevin Adams has tried to bring in a bunch of misfits from different teams and try to mash them together. And it very well could happen. Again, you see expansion teams have really, great success. You look at Vegas and Seattle, they kind of did what Kevin Adams did, right? They bring in guys from every team. Now, granted, they might get a little more star power because that's how it works. But these guys who maybe didn't get opportunities at other places come in and all of a sudden, yeah, you're a pivotal role. You might be a fourth liner like Sam Lafferty. You're a fourth liner on this team, but you're on a really good fourth line now, and you're going to have a crucial role to this team. So,
Yeah.
that is the reason for optimism. Again, you don't have the name value in Buffalo right now, and you're not going to get that till you make the playoffs or until you pull off some crazy trade that, we're not expecting. But it very well could be a very good year for the Sabres team. It's just you see teams get, big name guys, and we're sitting there like, all right, third liner, career fourth liner. That's why we're pessimistic. But we'll see what Lindy could do. I think Lindy Ruff is the biggest, contributor to this optimism. I think a lot of people think he's going to be the magic that fixes this team.
Yeah. And let me remind folks, the Sabres finished only uh it's pretty agonizing, but we finished 7 points out of a playoff spot last year. When everything went wrong, when Don Granato was the coach, we did not have a power play, barely had a penalty kill. We're getting carried by Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen for the second half of the season. And yet there were multiple occasions where if the Sabres had won just one more game, they'd be a game out. It was right there, right until game 79 for Buffalo. And that's with everything going wrong. So I guess with that sort of framing, you can sit back and say, well, guys, if last year was how it is when everything goes wrong, maybe when we finally put the pieces together with now an identity, with 4 rolling solid lines, with a D-core that could be something, with 2 goalies, hell, you even got 3 with James Reimer now, that are all of NHL caliber. Maybe this is the year. Maybe this is the year the Sabres finally can put it all together. Leapfrog teams like Detroit, like Pittsburgh, the Islanders, Washington. I mean, Cal, you look at the teams in front of us, even Washington, who added Pierre-Luc Dubois, Matt Roy. These aren't very good teams. These are all beatable. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I hate to do this, but I'm going to compare the Sabres to the Bills yet again. You look at the Bills, I'll keep saying this. They made the playoffs and everything changed, right? All of a sudden, these big name guys wanted to come to Buffalo. Josh Allen helped a lot. I get it. But all of a sudden, these free agents wanted to come to Buffalo. I've been saying that for the last 5 years. Do whatever it takes to get to the playoffs. I don't care if you get swept, but 4 games to nothing. It doesn't matter. You make the playoffs, those big names start to look your way, and you get a couple superstars, all of a sudden they all want to come here. If the Sabres can make the playoffs this year, like I've said year and year and year and year and year again, if the Sabres can make the playoffs this year, they will get some eyes on them from some of the big fish like Kevin Adams has failed to be able to get because of these no movement clauses or these trade lists that have every team on them except the Sabres, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems that's kind of the case, but we'll see. We just got to stay optimistic until it all falls apart, which I hate to say it, but we're so used to it. It's more so when as opposed to if it happens.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is the reality of the situation. It is up to the players now with a revamped bottom six, with a maintainment of the goaltending and the defensive cores. It's up to them. If if they really want to make the playoffs, I think they will. But if they don't, we'll get another season like last year where the attendance keeps bleeding out. The team continues to fall into the what I no one dares to say the same region as the Coyotes or the Florida Panthers in the mid 2010s and early 2010s. That's a scary territory, and it's something that's starting to become a reality the longer everything plays out. But anyways, folks, I was Don. This was Cal. This is Buffalo Sports Center. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe, and we hope to see all of you in the next video. Peace out.